Can you imagine sitting through a 10-hour flight without any type of entertainment? No food, no music, no movies, just mindless hours of sitting and doing nothing. Thankfully, that's not something we have to go through every time we hop on a flight. Now, we have the luxury to sit back and relax while food is served to us. We can listen to any kind of music and pick through some of the best movies or TV shows to watch. This great in-flight entertainment system actually started with a British airline called Virgin Atlantic. They were the first airline to introduce TVs into the back of every seat. Today, Virgin Atlantic is one of the biggest private airlines in the world. The airline uses a mixed fleet of Airbus and Boeing wide-body aircrafts. They travel to 13 destinations in North America, the Caribbean, Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. Virgin Atlantic is also the 7th largest airline in the United Kingdom. Why did Virgin Atlantic become so popular? Virgin's origin dates back to 1982 with Randolph Fields, an American-born lawyer. When the Falkland War ended in June of 1982, Fields created a plan to operate an airline between London and the Falkland Islands. The war was a dispute between the UK and Argentina over 2 British territories in the South Atlantic. The UK won the war, so it would make sense to create an airline from the UK to the islands. But unfortunately, Fields didn't know much about airplanes, so he contacted Alan Hellery, a former chief pilot for a British private airline. Not much time later, the two got together and co-founded British Atlantic Airways. But immediately after their startup in 1983, Fields and Hellery encountered a huge problem. The runway at Port Stanley Airport was too short. They knew that taking off and landing would be a problem for large aircrafts. Plus, the time and effort it would take to fix the runway would make the route to the Falkland Islands unviable. So, they decided to drop the idea of operating between the UK and the Falkland Islands. They applied for the commercial route between Gatwick Airport and JFK International. They were rejected. But when they applied for a license between Gatwick and Newark, New Jersey, they were finally approved. They used a 380-seat McDonnell Douglas DC-10. This is the same model of airplane that was involved in one of the most deadly flight mishaps, American Airlines Flight 191. McDonnell Douglas would soon end production of the plane in 1989 due to lack of orders from the crash. The plane Fields and Hellery planned to use was perfectly safe, and they were ready for their first flight. Even though they finally were approved for their first flight, they soon realized that they needed more funding. It was then that Fields contacted Richard Branson looking for an investment. After tough negotiations, Branson finally agreed to a 75% stake in British Atlantic Airways. Fields was then appointed the chairman, while Branson renamed the British Atlantic Airways to what we now know as Virgin Atlantic Airways. It became part of Branson's holding company, Virgin Group. Richard Branson started his journey as an entrepreneur at a very young age. At just 16, he dropped out of school after struggling with dyslexia, although that didn't put him down. Soon after dropping out, he created a magazine called Student, a magazine that, according to Branson himself, covered everything that other magazines didn't. While that may sound like common sense, it was actually pretty revolutionary at the time. You have to remember this is the year 1968. Nobody was connected to the world through their fingertips as we are today. Branson figured that if he could get students connected and thinking about what's going on in the world through a magazine, he could have some serious business. He was right. Student magazine sold almost $8,000 worth of advertising in its first issue. Branson's journey didn't end there. He started a record company called Virgin. In just 4 years, he opened 14 record stores, and in 1972, he used the money he made from the record company to start his own record label called Virgin Records. It was Virgin Records that propelled Branson into millionaire status. With his record label doing extremely well, Branson began expanding his ownership to companies such as Virgin Books and Virgin Video. With his empire expanding so rapidly, it almost seems natural for Branson to start his own airline. Although, the way it came about may not be how many of us would have expected it to. So what was the reason Richard Branson started Virgin Atlantic? One day, when he was trying to leave Puerto Rico and go back to the British Virgin Islands, where he hadn't seen his girlfriend in weeks, but unfortunately his flight was canceled, so he was stuck. So what did Branson do? He walked to the back of his plane and asked for a chalkboard and some chalk. Then he figured out how much it would cost to charter a plane to the British Virgin Islands, and how much it would cost each passenger if the expenses were shared, and he basically just went for it. He walked up and down the aisles of the grounded airplane to sell tickets. On the chalkboard he wrote, $39, one way to BVI. Somebody said to him, sharpen up the service a little bit and you could be in the airline business. And that was essentially Virgin Atlantic's first flight. With Richard Branson's new investment and ownership, Virgin Atlantic leased a second-hand Boeing 747-200. They became successful within a year, with enough profits to lease another Boeing. But as for Fields and Branson, they had a lot of of disagreements over operations. Eventually, Fields stepped down as chairman. He agreed to be bought out for over $1.3 million, with further payment on Virgin Atlantic's first dividend. Fields also sold his 25% stake to Branson. Branson successfully continued the operations for Virgin Atlantic, and in November of 1984, they launched a service between Gatwick Airport and Maastricht-Aken Airport in the Netherlands, using a chartered BAC 111. Then, in 1986, they acquired another Boeing 747, as well as other long-range aircrafts that have expanded their routes. They had new operations in Tokyo, New York, Los Angeles, Boston, and many more. It was in the late 1980s and early 1990s that Virgin Atlantic Airways built a solid reputation. In 1992, Richard Branson sold Virgin Music to Thorn EMI, and he invested the proceeds into Virgin Atlantic. They launched their first super economy service, which later became the award-winning premium economy class. Branson believed that airlines cared more about their profits rather than their crew and passengers. Soon, Virgin Atlantic was known for caring and entertaining their passengers by serving food during the flight. Virgin Atlantic introduced 3 classes for passengers: economy, premium, and upper class. Economy class is the standard class of seating in air travel. The passengers are served free meals and drinks. Next is premium class, which also provides passengers with the benefits of economy. However, it was more elite, as they were given seats with more legroom and comfort. Passengers of upper class were provided with a first-class food menu, an in-flight bar, and a fitted flatbed. To make it even better, Virgin Atlantic introduced an in-flight entertainment system for all passengers in 1991. As Virgin Atlantic expanded to Heathrow Airport, British Airways was not happy with the new competition. British Airways tried to undermine Virgin Air's reputation by posing as fake Virgin Atlantic staff, poaching passengers, and looking through private documents. So Branson sued British Airways for libel and won. British Airways had to pay a legal bill of over $4 million, plus damages to Branson of $680,000 and $150,000 to his airline. So what did Branson do with all this money he just won? He gave all the money to the Virgin Atlantic staff. All of the employees distributed the money equally, and they called it the BA Christmas bonus, the BA being short for British Airlines, of course. In 2000, Virgin Atlantic made big moves by expanding its flight operations and selling over 40% of its shares to Singapore Airlines for over $800 million. This increased their value to almost $1.4 billion, making Virgin Atlantic one of the biggest private airlines in the world. Virgin Airlines made history by being the first airline to use the Airbus A340-600 in 2002. They also operated the world's first biofuel flight in 2008. The flight was from Orlando to the Gatwick Airport in UK. It ran on sustainable fuel from the biotech startup LanzaTech. Sustainable fuel is a huge factor in reducing greenhouse gas emissions and improving air quality. In 2016, they introduced live TV in-flight entertainment, which allowed passengers to tune into live TV with their own seat-back screen with no extra cost. The live TV included 3 channels: Sports 24, BBC World News, and CNN International. By the end of 2017, they also presented their passengers with Wi-Fi connectivity across the entire aircraft. In the same year, Virgin Atlantic also announced its intention to form a joint venture with Air France and Delta Airlines. In their agreement, Air France would acquire a 31% stake in Virgin Atlantic for around $300 million. Virgin Atlantic was to retain its independence as a UK airline with a UK opening certificate and would continue to fly under the Virgin Atlantic brand. Virgin Atlantic really made people rethink the aviation industry. In 2019, Virgin Atlantic allowed its flight stewardesses to not wear makeup and have a choice to wear pants rather than a skirt. While it may not seem like a huge change, it's all the small changes together that set Virgin Atlantic apart. But of course, every success story always seems to have its downfall. Amid the coronavirus pandemic in 2020, Virgin Atlantic announced over 3,000 job losses in the UK and that they were to end their operations at Gatwick Airport. Richard Branson also received criticism from the public by asking employees to take 8 weeks unpaid leave. In August 2020, Virgin Atlantic unfortunately filed for bankruptcy protection from creditors in the United States of America as a part of a recapitalization and debt restructuring plan. The creditors approved the $1.65 billion rescue package and debt restructuring. Branson also put $275 million from the share of sales in his Virgin Galactic Holdings Incorporated space venture. Then, on September 4th, 2020, Virgin Atlantic had to announce a second round of job cuts, which totaled to about 1,150 across all their departments. Since the start of the year 2020, the company has halved its workforce due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Shai Weiss, the chief executive of the company, stated, "Further reducing the number of people we employ is heartbreaking but essential." Branson's worries don't stop there. His Virgin Group, which includes several businesses such as hotels, gyms, and cruises was also affected by the pandemic. He told CNBC that they are exploring all available options to obtain more money, including private sector funding. Virgin Atlantic is taking actions to reduce costs, preserve cash, and save as many jobs as possible.